I passed the mashed potatoes with a smile that barely held. Across the table, my daughter-in-law set down her fork and said, "Can we stop talking about the past for once?" My son stayed silent. My grandson didn't even look up. The roast I'd cooked from memory sat untouched on my plate. That night, while they laughed downstairs without me, I opened the drawer where my will was kept and started erasing names. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The roast chicken shimmered under the dining room lights, its skin crisp and golden, the smell of rosemary and lemon thick enough to taste before a single bite. Marilyn carved slowly, like she always did. Steady hands practiced from decades of Sunday dinners when stories filled every silence and nobody checked their phones. "This reminds me of the time your dad tried to grill in the rain," she said with a soft laugh, glancing toward the empty chair that still wore its cushion dent like memory itself. Chelsea's sigh came sharp and quick, slicing through the table chatter before it even began. "Can we not talk about the past every time, Marilyn?" Her manicured nails tapped against the wine glass, a restless metronome of irritation. Derek's fork froze midair. He glanced at his wife, then at his mother, but his mouth never opened. The silence between them stretched, tight as piano wire. "It's just a story," Marilyn said gently, eyes moving from her son to her grandson. Noah barely looked up, his face lit by the blue glow of his phone, thumbs scrolling through someone else's life. She smiled anyway, but it trembled. A smile that held back decades of being talked over, of learning that love can sound a lot like dismissal. The clatter of cutlery filled the space where her voice used to belong. Steam rose from the mashed potatoes, fogging the silver salt shaker that had once belonged to her mother. She wondered if anyone at the table knew that, or cared. Chelsea was talking again, her voice light but pointed, about backsplash tiles and marble countertops. Marilyn stared at her plate, the food cooling in front of her, each bite harder to swallow than the last. The scent of lemon and thyme turned metallic in her throat. "Everything okay, Mom?" Derek asked at last, almost an afterthought. Marilyn nodded. "Of course, dear. Everything's perfect." The word perfect hung there, so fragile it could shatter on contact. She turned slightly, catching her reflection in the glass cabinet. Silver hair, careful posture, eyes that once guided classrooms of children who hung on every word. Now she could barely keep her own family's attention. Funny how the world shrinks when people stop listening. Noah laughed suddenly at something on his screen. Chelsea smiled at him. A real smile, warm and maternal. And Marilyn watched that tiny gesture like a spectator, wondering when affection had learned to skip generations. She tried again. "Your father used to say the best meals were the ones that ended with crumbs on your shirt." Chelsea's fork clinked down hard against her plate. "And yet here we are, talking about him again. Maybe we could, I don't know, live in the present for once?" The words landed heavy, but what hurt wasn't their sharpness. It was how ordinary they sounded, how practiced. Marilyn's stories had become background noise, static to be tuned out. Derek reached for the gravy boat, pretending to focus on it. He was always the peacekeeper, always building bridges over fires that had already burned out. "It's fine," Marilyn said softly, even though it wasn't. "Some things just slip out of habit." Chelsea offered a tight smile. "Exactly. Let's make new habits." Marilyn nodded, her throat tight. New habits, she thought, like pretending the old ones never mattered. Outside, rain began to trace long, crooked lines down the windowpane, a quiet percussion that matched the slow ache in her chest. The dining room, with its soft chandelier and polished table, suddenly felt like someone else's home. Her recipes, her stories, her family, but none of it belonging to her anymore. When she stood to refill the water pitcher, her knees creaked and the chair legs scraped the hardwood like a small protest. Derek started to rise but sat back down when Chelsea touched his wrist. "I've got it," Marilyn murmured, though no one had offered to help. In the kitchen, she let the faucet run longer than needed, listening to the hum of water drown out the muffled conversation in the next room. She pictured her husband's face, the way he used to wink when the kids got fidgety, the shared humor in his eyes that said, "We'll survive them, dear." But he wasn't here to share it now. The pitcher overflowed, cold water spilling over her hands. She shut it off, drying her fingers on the hem of her apron before returning to the table. No one seemed to notice she'd been gone. Chelsea was showing Derek a photo on her phone, a marble island, white as bone. "Something timeless," she said. Marilyn almost laughed. "Timeless," she thought, "like the things you spend your life erasing." She sat down, adjusted her napkin, and looked at her family. 3 generations, connected by name and proximity, not memory. The ache behind her smile pulsed like a quiet drumbeat. When dessert was offered, she shook her head. "I think I'm full," she whispered. But what she really meant was, "I think I've had enough." And as the rain deepened outside, Marilyn made a silent promise to herself. One no one at that table would ever hear. Next time, she wouldn't stay silent at all. The chicken cooled on her plate, a glossy monument to effort wasted. Marilyn pushed it aside, appetite gone, watching gravy harden into pale streaks like dried paint. Chelsea leaned back in her chair, phone in hand, launching into talk about the new kitchen remodel. Quartz counters, brass fixtures, a skylight Derek wasn't sure they could afford. Noah forked a bite of chicken without looking up, his attention locked somewhere in a digital world that didn't include her. "Let's not get into anything tonight," Derek murmured, already tired, eyes darting between his wife and his mother like a man diffusing a quiet bomb. "Oh, we're not," Chelsea said, voice syrupy smooth. "We're just talking about progress." Marilyn folded her napkin slowly, placed it beside her untouched plate, and stood. "I think I'm done for tonight." No one looked up right away. The rain outside had deepened to a steady hush, pressing against the windows like it wanted in. The chandelier hummed faintly, its light soft and sterile, illuminating the perfect meal she no longer wanted to be part of. Chelsea said something about cabinet finishes. Derek nodded. Noah laughed. At what? She didn't know. But the sound was hollow, disconnected, like static between radio stations. She carried her plate to the sink, scraping food that had taken 3 hours to prepare into the trash. The smell of rosemary clung to her hands. It used to smell like family. Now it just smelled like effort. The hum of their conversation blurred behind her. Words like contractor and budget floated into the kitchen, bland and bloodless. She stood there for a long time, staring at the tiny crack in the tile by the stove, the one Derek promised to fix 6 years ago. Somehow, that crack had become the most honest thing in the house. "Mom?" Derek's voice came from the doorway, tentative. "You okay?" She turned, forcing a small smile. "Of course, I'm just tired." He nodded but didn't move closer. "Chelsea's just stressed about the renovation. You know how it is." "I do," she said softly. "I just didn't realize stress erased manners." He sighed, not in frustration, but in surrender. "Please, let's not make this a thing." Marilyn brushed past him. "Oh, it's not a thing," she said, her tone level but cool. "It's dinner. Just dinner." The lie tasted bitter as she spoke it. She walked down the hall, the sound of her footsteps soft on the old wood floors. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and rain. Her reflection followed her in every darkened window. Small, upright, and suddenly very tired. In her bedroom, she sat at the edge of the bed, listening to the muted rhythm of laughter from the dining room. Chelsea's laughter, sharp and performative. Derek's low, nervous chuckle. Noah's quick bursts between bites. None of it reached her. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. One new message, Frankie. How was it? Marilyn stared at the words for a long moment, thumbs hovering. She could answer with fine, the word she'd been trained to use her whole life, the social gauze that hides bruises without healing them. Instead, she typed, quiet, then deleted it. Typed again, predictable. Deleted that too. Finally, she wrote, next time, I might just skip it. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. A few seconds later, Bubbles appeared. Frankie. Good. Come over here next time. I'll make lasagna. No critics allowed. Marilyn smiled, a small private one, the kind that doesn't have to hide behind politeness. She pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders, walked to the window, and looked out at the wet street. A single lamppost flickered, casting long shadows over the lawn. Somewhere across the hedge she could hear the low hum of Frankie's old radio drifting through the mist, the tune faint but familiar. The sound felt like company. Back in the dining room, laughter spiked again, sharp, false, echoing through the walls like someone else's party. Marilyn let it fade into background noise, then reached up to close the curtains, shutting out the house that no longer felt like home. Her phone buzzed one more time. Frankie. You good? Marilyn typed slowly. I will be. She set the phone down, exhaled, and let the silence settle around her. In that silence, she felt something shift, small but certain. A seed of resolve, pushing quietly through the soil of her disappointment. Next time, she wouldn't just skip dinner. She'd rewrite the invitation list. Morning light seeped through the curtains, pale and uncertain, washing the room in that quiet gray that makes everything look softer than it feels. Marilyn sat at the edge of her bed, the hum of last night still echoing faintly in her ears, the clinking glasses, the hollow laughter, the silence that had followed her up the stairs. On the dresser, a loose stack of old photo envelopes leaned precariously beside her jewelry box, and one glossy print slipped out, landing face up on the floor. She bent down to pick it up and froze. It was her and Henry, young, grinning, shoulders dusted with flour in their first kitchen, the kind of joy that needed no performance. Scrawled beneath in Henry's looping hand were the words, "Build what you wish they'd protect." She traced the ink with her thumb until it smudged, her breath catching somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. Then the phone rang, jolting her. Evelyn's name glowing on the screen like a door she hadn't planned to open yet. Marilyn Harper, she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. Just checking in, Evelyn said, brisk but warm. You sounded off last night in your text. Everything all right? Marilyn hesitated, staring at the photograph again. Fine, she lied, then added quietly. Just a long dinner. The Chelsea kind of long or the Derek kind? Marilyn smiled despite herself. The kind that leaves you wondering why you bothered cooking. Then it's the Chelsea kind, Evelyn said dryly. You deserve a medal for endurance. Marilyn let out a small laugh, but it faded quickly. Sometimes I think I'm the ghost in my own house. That's not new, Evelyn said. You've been too polite to haunt anyone. The words landed gently but stuck like burrs. Marilyn promised to call later, hung up, and stood still for a moment, the photograph still in her hand. Build what you wish they'd protect. The phrase looped in her mind like a lesson she'd once taught others but never followed herself. She walked down the hall, the wooden floor cold beneath her slippers. Dust floated in the early light, drifting lazily through air that smelled faintly of old linen and rain. At the end of the hall, the guest room door sat half open, a room that had waited years for visitors who never came. Inside, everything was perfectly arranged: folded quilts, freshly laundered sheets, framed pictures of Noah as a toddler. She hadn't stepped inside in months, maybe longer. The air felt untouched, reverent and stale all at once. The bedspread was one she'd sewn herself, pale blue cotton, soft from years of washing. She ran her fingers over the stitching, small ridges of patience. Each line, a memory; each square, a season of life she'd once believed her family would honor. Noah had never slept here. Even when he was little, Chelsea preferred hotels. "He sleeps better in his own bed," she'd said. Marilyn had nodded then, not realizing how many small nods would accumulate into quiet erasure. On the dresser sat a stack of picture books and a puzzle still sealed in its plastic. She'd bought it when Noah was 10, a 1,000-piece scene of a forest at dusk. She had imagined them sitting together on a rainy afternoon, piecing it slowly, talking about life. He'd never opened it. The box edges were soft with dust. The floor creaked under her as she walked to the window, pushing it open. Cool air drifted in, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and pine. The world outside moved on easily: dog walkers, joggers, a mail truck rumbling by, while she stood rooted, remembering the sound of Henry's laugh, the way he used to whistle while painting the trim. She imagined him standing beside her now, arm draped across her shoulder, eyes on the same half-lived space. "They don't see what we built, do they?" she thought. "Not yet," she answered herself. Her gaze fell again to the phone on the nightstand, Evelyn's name still glowing in the recent call list. The sight steadied her, a reminder that someone still listened when she spoke. She took one last look at the photo in her hand and smiled, faint but sure. Then she slid it into a new frame and placed it on the hallway shelf where every guest could see. A quiet rebellion, nothing loud, nothing vengeful yet, but a seed planted all the same. Downstairs, she heard the faint ping of a notification. Chelsea's voice note in the family group chat. Marilyn didn't play it. She didn't need to. She already knew the tone. Efficient, polished, detached. She picked up the photo frame once more, feeling the weight of its glass and memory, and whispered to Henry's frozen smile, "You were right." The wind shifted through the open window, scattering a bit of dust onto the quilt. She didn't brush it away. Then her phone buzzed again. Evelyn calling back. Marilyn hesitated this time, her hand hovering over the screen, because for the first time in years, she didn't want to answer as the woman everyone forgot. She wanted to answer as the woman who was about to remember herself. The lake was still that morning, a sheet of glass reflecting gray skies and the faint outlines of bare trees bowing in the wind. Marilyn parked in front of Evelyn Wu's office, a small cedar building tucked between a row of birches, its windows glowing with the soft amber light of early winter. She sat in the car for a long moment, the old manila envelope on the passenger seat staring back at her like a quiet dare. When she finally stepped out, the cold air bit at her cheeks, sharp and clean, almost like permission. Inside, Evelyn was already at her desk, a stack of folders arranged with surgical precision, glasses balanced low on her nose. "You're early," she said, looking up. "That usually means someone's made up their mind." Marilyn slid the envelope across the desk. "I want to revise every name." Evelyn paused, studying her friend's face. "Every name?" she echoed, as though testing the weight of the words. Marilyn nodded. "Every single one." Her tone was calm, deliberate, the same tone she used to take attendance in her classroom. Steady, factual, impossible to argue with. Evelyn opened the envelope and pulled out the old will, its edges soft and yellowed from time. The ink of familiar names stared up at them both. Derek Harper, Chelsea Harper, Noah Harper. The lineage of loyalty, on paper at least. Are you sure you want to do this? Evelyn asked, her pen poised above a legal pad. Once we start, it's not a small thing to undo. Marilyn rested her hands on the polished oak surface, fingers tracing invisible circles. I've spent my whole life making small things easy to undo. This one, I want to last. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the heater and the distant tap of rain on the windows. Evelyn studied her, not as a client, but as a friend who'd reached the quiet, irreversible edge of tolerance. Finally, Evelyn clicked her pen and began typing. All right, who's out? Marilyn exhaled. Derek, Chelsea, Noah. The sound of the keys clacking was strangely satisfying, like doors closing in sequence. Evelyn glanced up once, but Marilyn didn't waver. And who's in? Evelyn asked. Marilyn reached into her purse, pulling out a folded list. Written in her careful teacher's handwriting, each name inked clearly, evenly spaced. These. Evelyn unfolded it. 2 names she didn't recognize. Former students. A community literacy fund. And one final name, familiar. Frances Doyle. Evelyn smiled slightly. Frankie will be pleased. She'll try to act humble, but she'll tell everyone at bingo. Marilyn chuckled softly. Let her. She's earned it. They worked in silence after that, the printer humming softly as new pages replaced the old. Each signature line was like a clean incision, removing the rot she'd been too afraid to cut before. When Evelyn handed her the pen, Marilyn held it for a second longer than necessary, feeling its weight. She looked out the window, the lake beyond it, unmoving, mirror smooth. Henry used to say people show you how they value you by where they sit when you're quiet, she said. I've been quiet for years, Evelyn. You'd think they'd at least notice the empty seat. Evelyn leaned back. Sometimes the only way to make people notice is to disappear from their future, too. Marilyn nodded once. Exactly. The pen glided across the final line. The paper smelled faintly of ink and new beginnings. When she was done, Evelyn slid the pages into a leather folder and sealed it with a firm press. Now it's official. No contests, no loopholes. Your estate is exactly as you wish it. Marilyn sat back, letting out a slow, controlled breath. They left me out while I was alive, she said softly. They won't own me when I'm gone. Her words hung in the air, steady and unflinching, not angry, just final. Evelyn gave a single approving nod. Then you've rewritten your ending. Marilyn smiled faintly. Not the ending, just the next chapter. As she stood to leave, Evelyn followed her to the door. The rain had stopped, and the lake had taken on the dull shimmer of pewter. Do you want me to send copies to Derek? Evelyn asked. Marilyn slipped her purse over her shoulder. No. Let silence deliver it. It speaks louder coming from nowhere. Evelyn's laughter was low and knowing. You always did understand poetry better than vengeance. Marilyn turned at the door, meeting her friend's eyes with a look that carried something sharp, new, and dangerous beneath its calm. Who says it can't be both? She stepped out into the chill, the wind tugging at her coat. The world smelled of wet leaves and clean slates. Behind her, Evelyn stood at the window watching her walk away. The woman who'd finally stopped asking to be heard. And as Marilyn reached her car, the clouds broke just enough for a thin, silvery light to touch the lake. It was faint, but it was hers. The sound of Evelyn's stamp echoed through the small office like a gavel. Firm, final, unchallengeable. Marilyn watched the red ink bloom against the page, marking the official end of her family's entitlement. Now, Evelyn said, peeling off her reading glasses, they can't contest this. Not a clause, not a cent. Marilyn didn't smile, but something in her shoulders released, a long-held weight unclenching itself from her spine. Good, she said quietly. I'm tired of being someone they only remember when the check clears. Evelyn leaned back, eyes soft but impressed. You know, I always wondered when you'd finally stop playing nice. Marilyn stood, slipping her purse strap over her shoulder. Nice never got me heard. The paperwork sat neatly stacked in the folder, a monument to her decision. Clean, irrevocable, deliberate. She ran a hand over it once before tucking it into her bag, like sealing a memory shut. Through the wide window behind Evelyn's desk, the lake shimmered under a thin veil of sunlight. The air outside had cleared, the storm gone, leaving the world scrubbed and cool. You sure you're ready for this? Evelyn asked, voice low now. Marilyn paused at the door. I was ready the first time she rolled her eyes at me for remembering my husband. Evelyn nodded. Then go. Don't look back. The bell above the door chimed as Marilyn stepped into the sharp morning air. The wind smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Every step toward her car felt different, deliberate, balanced, lighter. By the time she reached the main road, the office was a shrinking reflection in her rearview mirror. The old ache in her chest, the one that used to flare up after every Sunday dinner, had dulled into something steadier, almost peaceful. At a red light, she caught her own reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, she didn't look like someone waiting for permission to speak. She pulled into a small neighborhood market on the edge of Laurelhurst. It was one of those places that smelled like coffee and paper bags, the kind of store she and Henry used to stop at for ice cream after his doctor appointments. Inside, the aisles glowed under warm light. Marilyn grabbed a basket and filled it absently. Lemons, flour, a new jar of honey. She didn't really need anything. She just wanted to move through a world that felt ordinary again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the family group chat lighting up with Chelsea's voice note. Marilyn didn't open it. She could almost script the tone already. Clipped, self-satisfied, polite enough to pass for affection. She turned the corner into the produce aisle and froze. Chelsea stood there, Bluetooth headset in her ear, gesturing animatedly with one hand while tapping through her phone with the other. No, Gary, listen. We agreed on Calicut marble, not Carrara. There's a difference, and I'm not settling for cheap stone just because Derek's mother thinks beige is timeless. Marilyn stayed still, unseen behind a pyramid of oranges. For a brief, absurd moment, she wondered if this was the universe testing her resolve. The daughter-in-law who treated her legacy like an inconvenience was standing 3 feet away, arguing about countertops as if marble had ever made a home. Chelsea turned slightly, eyes scanning the aisle, but her gaze swept right past Marilyn without a flicker of recognition. It was almost poetic. Marilyn took one quiet step forward, then stopped herself. For once, there was no need to correct, to teach, to reach across the chasm. The silence she carried now wasn't an absence. It was a weapon. She slipped past the end cap, choosing a different checkout lane. At the register, she could still hear Chelsea's voice rising behind her. I don't care what it costs. It has to feel luxury. The cashier smiled politely as he bagged Marilyn's items. Find everything okay, ma'am? She returned the smile, calm and measured. Better than okay, she said. Found what I needed. Outside, the sky had broken open into weak sunlight, streaking the puddles with silver. She stood beside her car for a moment, grocery bag in hand, the cool air filling her lungs. In the reflection of the window, she saw herself again. Same gray hair, same familiar lines. But there was something new in her posture, something steadier. For 70 years, she'd built her life around other people's comfort. Now she was building something else, a truth that didn't need permission. She slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool beneath her palms, and looked once more toward the store's entrance. Chelsea was still inside, phone pressed to her ear, oblivious. Marilyn started the engine. The hum of it vibrated through her chest, strong and certain. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she whispered to herself, "They'll learn what's worth protecting when there's nothing left to claim." The traffic light turned green and she drove forward. Not fast, but steady, into the next version of her life, where silence wasn't surrender anymore. The phone buzzed 3 times before Marilyn turned it face down on the kitchen counter, letting the vibration fade into silence. Derek's name glowed briefly on the screen, followed by the words, "Family dinner ideas? Chelsea wants something seasonal." She read it once, twice, and then set the phone aside, her lips tightening around a smile that wasn't quite amusement. The kitchen clock ticked in the quiet. Slow, sure, indifferent. Instead of replying, Marilyn reached for the mixing bowl, the one with the chip near the rim that Henry used to call the lucky spot. She pulled out flour, sugar, bananas soft with freckles, and turned the oven to 350. If they wanted a family dinner, they could host it without her. The scent of banana and cinnamon filled the kitchen, curling around her like a memory that refused to turn bitter. She stirred deliberately, her motion steady, the wooden spoon scraping just enough to echo against the bowl. It had been years since she baked without obligation. No potluck, no grandchild's birthday, no hostess gift. Just the simple rhythm of doing something that needed no audience. She poured the batter into 2 pans, smoothing the tops with her spatula, then slid them into the oven. The heat fogged her glasses. It felt like a small act of rebellion, quiet, domestic, unremarkable, and hers alone. The phone buzzed again. Group chat. "Mom, you there?" She wiped her hands on a towel and stared at the message. The typing bubble appeared, then vanished. A minute later, Chelsea chimed in. "Let's do Sunday. We can make it easy. You bring dessert." Marilyn chuckled under her breath. The irony was sweet as sugar. She turned the phone off entirely, slipped it into the drawer, and went back to stirring her second bowl of batter. By late morning, the loaves cooled on wire racks, steam still curling off the crust. The house smelled warm, alive, like the kind of home people remember missing. She wrapped each loaf in parchment and twine, slipped one into her tote bag, and headed out. The community food bank sat 2 blocks away, a squat building with faded murals of children reading books under painted trees. Marilyn had helped fund that mural years ago through her school, long before Derek moved to Portland, and Chelsea began redecorating her life in muted tones of gold. Inside, volunteers unpacked boxes of canned soup and day-old bread. A young woman at the counter looked up and smiled. "Ms. Harper, you're back." "Couldn't stay away," Marilyn said, setting the banana bread on the table. The girl inhaled deeply. "That smells like love." "Smells like overripe bananas," Marilyn said with a wink. "But I'll take the compliment." She stayed a while, longer than she meant to, labeling food donations and chatting with a retired mail carrier who remembered her from the literacy drive 10 years ago. When she finally left, the air had shifted. It felt lighter. Her next stop was Frankie's. Frankie Doyle lived 2 houses down in a small craftsman with too many wind chimes and a porch full of mismatched furniture. She was on the swing when Marilyn arrived, glasses low on her nose, a crossword puzzle on her lap. "Brought you something," Marilyn said, handing her a loaf. Frankie sniffed it dramatically. "You trying to bribe me?" "Not yet," Marilyn said, setting her purse down. "But maybe soon." Frankie raised an eyebrow. "What did you do?" Marilyn pulled out the envelope, Evelyn's stamped and sealed copy of her new will. Frankie flipped through the pages, her mouth curling into a grin. "Oh, honey, you really did it." She looked up, eyes gleaming. "You took them all out?" "Every name." Frankie let out a whistle. "That's savage." Marilyn smiled. "It's just accurate." They sat for a while. The quiet between them, easy. The wind chimes clinked softly overhead. You know, Frankie said finally, this might be the first time I've seen you happy without pretending to be. Marilyn leaned back. I think I finally stopped waiting for their version of love. Frankie's grin widened. Took you long enough. That evening, back home, Marilyn sat by the window, cup of tea warming her hands. The sky outside had turned lavender, the neighborhood wrapped in that late dusk hush where porch lights flicker on like small intentions. Her phone vibrated again, just once. Out of habit, she picked it up. Chelsea Harper tagged you in a photo. Caption: 3 generations so blessed. The picture showed Derek and Noah in the yard, both smiling. Chelsea stood between them, one hand on Derek's shoulder, the other holding a wine glass. Marilyn wasn't in it. She scrolled to the comments. Beautiful family. What a legacy. You're glowing, Chels. Marilyn's chest tightened, not from hurt, but from clarity. This was the legacy they'd chosen: polished surfaces, curated affection, a performance with no room for truth. She tapped the 3 dots beside her name. Remove tag. Then, without hesitation, she opened her account settings and hit log out. The screen went black, reflecting only her own face back at her. Calm, still, and finally hers. Somewhere in the darkened kitchen, the scent of banana bread lingered, faint but comforting. She closed her eyes, breathing it in. Tomorrow, she'd bring another loaf to the food bank. And this time, she'd write Henry Harper Memorial Fund on the tag, a name worth remembering. The attic smelled of cedar, dust, and endings. That faint, sweet scent of paper aging quietly in forgotten boxes. Marilyn tugged at the chain for the light, a bare bulb flickering to life above her like a weary confession. She'd been meaning to clear this space for years, but today it wasn't about cleaning. It was about letting go. The right way, not the way Chelsea did it, with fresh paint and denial. She knelt beside a stack of book crates labeled in her own neat handwriting, Classroom Library, 2002. When she opened one, the smell of old pages rose around her, the smell of purpose. She brushed dust off a copy of Charlotte's Web, its corners soft and its dedication still legible, to Mrs. Harper, for making words feel like magic. That was the moment she knew exactly where these books belonged. By late morning, Marilyn pulled up to the old tutoring center downtown. A squat brick building near the light rail stop, its front windows painted with bright block letters: Read, Grow, Dream. Inside, the air buzzed with the low hum of kids and paper and fluorescent light. A young volunteer with pink hair greeted her at the door. "You're Mrs. Harper, right? Evelyn said you might come by." Marilyn smiled, the crate of books balanced carefully in her arms. "That's me. I used to teach a few blocks from here." "Well, you just made our week," the girl said, motioning her in. "The kids are always asking for real stories, not just the new flashy stuff." The words hit her softly. Real stories, the kind that came from hands that believed in second chances. As she unpacked the books, a small group of children gathered, curiosity blooming across their faces. One girl, maybe 9 or 10, clutched a notebook to her chest. Her hair was in messy braids, her sneakers untied. "You the one who brought the books?" she asked. Marilyn nodded. "Guilty." The girl grinned. "You gonna read one?" She hadn't planned to, but something in that expectant face made refusal impossible. "All right," she said, settling into a chair that creaked in protest. "But only if you promise to help me pick the next one." The girl nodded eagerly, scooting closer. The others followed, cross-legged on the carpet, waiting. Marilyn opened Charlotte's Web and began to read, her voice low and steady, shaped by years of teaching. The words rolled out like an old melody rediscovered, each one landing soft but certain. By the time she reached the last page, the room was still. The girl blinked up at her, eyes glossy with emotion. Then, without warning, she leaned forward and hugged Marilyn tight. The kind of hug that comes from instinct, not habit. "Are you coming back?" the girl whispered. Marilyn swallowed hard, her throat thick. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think I will." Later that afternoon, the house felt too quiet. The bookshelves looked emptier, but the air somehow felt fuller. She went to her closet to put away her coat. And there it was, a wrapped box on the top shelf, still in the same glossy blue paper she'd used nearly a year ago. Noah's last birthday gift, a pair of noise-canceling headphones, still in their box, still waiting for a moment that had never arrived. She lifted it down carefully, brushing off a faint layer of dust. On the corner, her handwriting. "To Noah. Love, Grandma." The words looked foreign now, like a language no one in her family spoke anymore. For a moment she considered keeping it, a quiet symbol of what could have been. But then she thought of the girl at the tutoring center, her small arms wrapped tight around her waist. Love wasn't supposed to wait in closets. Marilyn unwrapped the paper, removed the receipt, and slid it into a plain envelope. On the front she wrote Derek's address, neat, measured letters. Inside, she included a single sticky note. For return, unopened. At the post office, she handed it over without hesitation. The clerk glanced at the envelope. "You want tracking on this?" "No," Marilyn said. "It'll find its way." That evening, as twilight bled into the living room, her phone buzzed on the table. One new message from Derek. "Did you mean to drop that off?" Marilyn read it twice, her reflection faint in the screen's glow. Then, slowly, she typed her reply. Her thumb hovered for a long moment before she erased every word, locked the phone, and set it face down beside her tea. Some things didn't need answers anymore. She looked out the window toward the quiet street, the sky streaked with deep blue. Somewhere inside her chest, something unlatched. Not bitterness, not sorrow, just release. Tomorrow, she'd bring more books to the center. Maybe read The Secret Garden next time. Outside, the porch light flickered on, steady, patient, waiting for no one. The pen moved slowly at first, a hesitant tremor tracing across the cream pages of a leather-bound notebook. Marilyn hadn't written by hand in years, but the rhythm returned like breath. Deliberate, careful, each word stitched with memory. The first line came easily. "I was a teacher before I was anyone's mother." She paused, the ink still wet, and smiled faintly at the truth of it. Outside, late autumn rain whispered against the window, steady and soothing, like someone keeping time. She turned the page, writing about the school plays, the snow days, the laughter that used to fill her kitchen. For the first time, the past didn't ache. It simply existed, hers alone to record. By noon, her dining table had transformed into a scrapbook of her life. Photographs, postcards, ticket stubs. The kind of relics that told the story no one ever asked to hear. Frankie arrived with her usual knock, 3 sharp taps and no patience. "You making history or a mess?" "Both," Marilyn said, waving her in. "Depends on who you ask." Frankie set down her tote bag, pulling out a small flatbed scanner and a flash drive shaped like a gold key. "Brought my secret weapon," she said. "You never know when the Wi-Fi gods will fail us seniors." They worked side by side for hours, Frankie scanning photos with exaggerated care, Marilyn labeling envelopes and sliding handwritten pages into neat stacks. The smell of coffee and printer ink filled the room, punctuated by bursts of laughter whenever Frankie found something particularly dated. "Look at this one," Frankie said, holding up a photo. "You in that denim jumper, hair like a halo of frizz. Lord, how did Henry let you leave the house?" He thought it made me look approachable, Marilyn said, rolling her eyes. The PTA thought it made me look underpaid. Frankie cackled, almost dropping the scanner lid. Well, both were probably right. For a while, the house didn't feel empty. When they were done, Frankie handed her the flash drive. All scanned and saved. Evelyn said she'll lock the digital copies in her office vault next time you come by. Said it deserves the same protection as the will. Marilyn took the drive, its metallic edge cool against her palm. She's a good woman. She's a cautious woman, Frankie said. You're lucky she's on your side. Marilyn smiled. Luck's got nothing to do with it. Loyalty does. That evening, after Frankie left, Marilyn sat alone with the album spread across the table. She picked up a fresh one, gray linen cover, crisp new pages. And on the front, she wrote carefully in gold ink. For those who ask. It wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. The album would hold the stories of people who wanted to listen, not those who endured her words like background noise. She slid in a photo of her first classroom, 30 children, 2 chalkboards, and a younger version of herself standing proud in front of a crooked, welcome back sign. Then one of her and Henry, arm in arm outside their first house, the yard still wild with dandelions. Each image whispered something she'd stopped waiting for others to remember. By the time she finished, the rain had quieted, replaced by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock. She reached for her tea, cold now, and scrolled absently through her phone notifications. That's when she saw it. Chelsea Harper, new post. The caption sat beneath a polished photo of Derek, Chelsea, and Noah, all in matching sweaters before their newly remodeled kitchen island. She lives in the past. We live in progress. The comment section sparkled with agreement. Truth. Growth looks good on you. Can't stay stuck forever. Marilyn stared at the screen, her pulse steady but cold. The fluorescent light above her reflected faintly in the phone glass, splitting her face into fragments. For a moment she almost laughed. It wasn't anger she felt. It was recognition. They were proud of their reinvention, of erasing her story while standing on its foundation. She took a screenshot. Not to save proof, but to save perspective. Then she placed the phone down and opened her new album. On the final page, she tucked a printout of that screenshot and wrote beneath it in looping script. Progress is only real if you know what you're leaving behind. The rain began again, harder now, drumming against the roof like punctuation. Marilyn leaned back, closing her eyes, the faintest smile at the corner of her mouth. Tomorrow, she'd deliver the flash drive to Evelyn, but tonight, she would finish her story. Every word they'd tried not to hear. The morning came sharp and colorless, the kind of Portland gray that flattens the sky and makes even the trees look thoughtful. Marilyn sat at her kitchen table, a mug of black coffee cooling beside a stack of legal envelopes. Her final edits sealed, labeled, and ready to send. The flash drive Frankie had scanned now sat tucked inside one of them, a small archive of her life preserved not for her children, but for safekeeping. Her handwriting across the top read in crisp blue ink, for Evelyn Wu, long-term vault storage. Confidential. She smoothed her palm over the envelope, not with sentiment, but satisfaction. A teacher giving herself a passing grade. Then she reached for her phone and scrolled to her medical contact list, where Derek's name sat beside a title he'd never earned, primary decision maker. With one quiet tap, she deleted it. The screen flickered for a moment. A simple confirmation. No fanfare, no undo button. The finality of it felt cleaner than expected. For years, she'd kept Derek in that role out of duty, assuming blood still implied care. But blood, she'd learned, could be colder than ink. Next, she typed in a new name, Frances Doyle. Under relation, she entered friend. Under access, she wrote full. Her phone buzzed immediately after the update, a text from Frankie. Frankie. Just checking. Did I just become your next of kin or your accomplice? Marilyn smiled faintly. Marilyn. Both. Dress accordingly. She placed the phone face down, her coffee now cold, and sealed the remaining envelopes. Inside one was a notarized power of attorney, granting Frankie full authority over medical and estate decisions if Marilyn couldn't speak for herself. Evelyn had drawn up every page carefully, ensuring no loophole existed for family interference. It wasn't spite, it was precision, the quiet choreography of self-respect. Later that afternoon, she stopped by the post office. The clerk recognized her from her frequent visits. Same gray cardigan, same polite smile, always mailing something deliberate. Special delivery? He asked. Just something that finally belongs where it should, she said. He weighed the envelope, stamped it, and slid it into the outgoing bin. Watching it disappear down the chute felt oddly like exhaling. Outside, the air smelled faintly of damp pine and distant rain. Her car gleamed with droplets, the sky trying to decide whether to brake or clear. Instead of driving home, she turned left, toward the old elementary school. The building looked smaller than she remembered, the playground newer, the mural she'd helped design years ago fading around the edges. The front doors were propped open, and inside she heard the familiar rhythm of young voices, laughter in motion. The librarian, Mrs. Ellis, looked up from the circulation desk and gasped. Mrs. Harper, my goodness, look at you. Marilyn smiled. Still standing. That's something. Mrs. Ellis came around the desk, hugging her tight. We've missed you around here. How's retirement treating you? Quiet, Marilyn said. But useful. She placed a donation form on the counter, followed by a small box. Inside were new children's books. Glossy hardcovers about friendship, kindness, curiosity. The Marilyn Harper Reading Fund placed this order, she explained. Permanent donation. I wanted the kids to have stories that stay. Mrs. Ellis blinked fast, her voice breaking. Oh, Marilyn, you didn't have to. I did, Marilyn interrupted gently. Some stories shouldn't depend on who remembers them. The librarian wiped her eyes. You always were the best kind of stubborn. Marilyn chuckled. Still am. When she turned to leave, a few children at the tables looked up. One waved. Another whispered, Is she a teacher? Mrs. Ellis smiled through her tears. She is what teachers turn into when they don't stop caring. Marilyn walked out before emotion could follow. That evening, her phone buzzed as she settled into her armchair. A text from an unfamiliar number. Noah. Grandma, are you mad at me? She stared at the words, thumb hovering above the screen. The question was so young, so unguarded, it almost undid her. Mad? No. Disappointed? Not anymore. He didn't understand yet. Couldn't. His world was too full of mirrors and noise to notice who'd stepped quietly out of frame. She typed, No, Noah, just busy. Then she paused, erased it, and locked the phone. If he wanted answers, he'd have to ask, not text. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, and the reflection of her window cast her silhouette across the glass, upright, unyielding, undeniably alone, but no longer lonely. The envelope she'd mailed was already miles away, resting in the hands of the one person who knew her story start to finish. And tomorrow, when Evelyn filed it, the world would shift. Quietly, permanently. Because Marilyn Harper had stopped waiting to be remembered. She was making sure she couldn't be erased. The invitation sat unopened on her counter. An email from Derek. The subject line simple, almost pleading. Family dinner this Sunday? Marilyn didn't delete it, but she didn't reply either. She let it breathe there, like a note slipped under a locked door. By Saturday afternoon, a text followed. Chelsea says to tell you it's casual. Just us. Bring that banana bread if you want. She reread that last line. If you want. The softest illusion of choice. Then she placed her phone screen down, took a slow sip of tea, and said aloud to the empty room, I don't. Because this time she wasn't going to sit at a table where silence was treated like gratitude. Instead, she opened her calendar, scrolled to Sunday, and typed one word into the blank space. Busy. Sunday arrived crisp and blue, the kind of early spring day Portland saves for those who've earned it. The city shimmered with light after weeks of rain. Marilyn dressed in her favorite soft gray sweater, the one Henry used to call her writer's armor, and walked across the lawn to Frankie's house. Frankie opened the door holding a bottle of Pinot in one hand and 2 glasses in the other. You skipping the circus? Closed for renovations, Marilyn said. Frankie laughed, stepping aside to let her in. Good. I set the table for 2, just the right size for sanity. Inside, the smell of garlic and tomato filled the air. A pot simmered on the stove, red sauce bubbling like it had something to say. Lasagna night? Marilyn asked. Lasagna night, Frankie confirmed. And before you ask? Yes. I used real cheese this time. We're living dangerously. They ate at the small kitchen table by the window, the kind with old paint worn smooth by years of elbows and laughter. Outside, wind chimes swayed lazily, the sound soft and familiar. The conversation flowed the way it only could between people with nothing left to prove. They talked about the weather, a neighbor's new dog, the absurdity of online recipes that start with life stories instead of ingredients. Halfway through dinner, Frankie raised her glass. To not showing up where you're not seen. Marilyn clinked hers gently. The sound was small, but it rang clear. To the peace they didn't earn. They sipped, the quiet between them rich as the wine itself. For the first time in months, Marilyn wasn't measuring her tone, her patience, her place in a room. She was simply there. Seen, heard, understood. Across town, in a house full of polished surfaces and filtered smiles, Chelsea arranged the dinner table under the new pendant lights. Derek sliced roast chicken while Noah scrolled at the counter. She's not coming, is she? Chelsea asked, not looking up. She said she was busy, Derek replied, his voice flat but careful. Chelsea smirked. Guess Mom's still stuck in history. Derek didn't rise to the bait. He poured himself a glass of water and said quietly, Let her be. Chelsea's knife paused midair. I'm just saying, it's sad. She has all this time and... She's fine, Derek cut in. Probably happier than we think. And for once, he wasn't wrong. Back in Frankie's kitchen, dessert had turned into conversation again. Soft, unhurried, edged with shared history. Frankie leaned back in her chair, eyes half closed. You ever think they'll realize what they lost? Marilyn swirled the last of her wine. They'll realize something. Whether it's the right thing, I don't know. Still, Frankie said, raising her glass again. Here's to realizing your own worth before they do. Marilyn laughed quietly. I'll drink to that. The sound of clinking glasses filled the space. Gentle, deliberate, final. Her phone buzzed on the counter, but she didn't move to check it. The moment didn't need interruption. Later, when the plates were cleared and the night had folded in around them, she finally picked it up. An email notification glowed on the screen. From Evelyn Wu. Subject: Final filing complete. All documents secure. Beneath it, Evelyn had added a single line. You've built something permanent, Marilyn. Sleep well. Marilyn set the phone down, her pulse steady. Outside, a breeze rattled the chimes again, the melody low and knowing. She looked at Frankie, who was pouring the last of the wine into both glasses. Permanent, Marilyn repeated softly. The word tasted right. Frankie smiled. About time. Marilyn raised her glass one last time. To permanence, she said, and to not needing anyone to witness it. As they drank, the sound of distant laughter carried faintly from next door. A different dinner, a different table, a world she'd finally stepped outside of. And for the first time, she didn't miss her seat at all. The morning after the dinner that wasn't, Marilyn woke to silence so thick it almost hummed. Her phone blinked once on the nightstand. Another family group message, unread. For years, those little blue notifications had dictated her days. Birthdays, holiday plans, reminders to bring something sweet. She picked it up, stared at the screen, and realized she didn't owe it her attention anymore. With a few steady taps, she scrolled to group info, delete thread, confirm. The chat vanished, leaving nothing but white space, cleaner than any apology could have been. For the first time, the quiet felt like freedom, not absence. The rest of the morning unfolded with the kind of clarity she hadn't felt in years. Coffee brewed in her kitchen as she sat cross-legged on the rug with her laptop open, the screen glowing with folders labeled Family. Hundreds of photos, voice memos, and calendar invites stared back at her. Digital ghosts of obligations long past. She clicked into her voicemail inbox. Derek's old check-ins, Chelsea's clipped holiday greetings, Noah's accidental butt dials, all stored like artifacts from another life. One by one, she downloaded them. The file names scrolled down the screen in neat, quiet order. Voicemail Zoandond et 4A, 2017. Hey mom, just checking in. Voicemail Satan 12 Bep 4A, 2020. Chelsea wants to know if you're bringing pie. Voicemail 19 to M4A, 2022. Noah says thanks for the card. She saved them to a single folder, labeled it Archive, the voices I once waited for. Then she dragged it onto her external drive and closed the laptop. No tears, just calm. The sound of the trash bin icon emptying, that faint metallic swoosh, was oddly satisfying. By noon, she'd moved to the hall closet, pulling out the framed photos that lined the shelf. She stacked them gently on the table, glass glinting under the soft morning light. A younger Marilyn smiling at a picnic. Derek's high school graduation. A family trip to Seaside, everyone half squinting against the sun. Each frame told a version of her life, curated, posed, selective. She ran her hand over the largest one, a portrait taken 5 Christmases ago. Chelsea had insisted on matching sweaters. Henry's old armchair had been pushed out of the shot because it threw off the aesthetic. Marilyn studied her own smile in that photo, polite, small, rehearsed. She didn't recognize the woman anymore. That afternoon, she carried the box of frames to her car and drove to the Laurelhurst Senior Center. The woman at the front desk, thin as a whisper and wearing a bright floral scarf, looked up as Marilyn entered. Donation day? Marilyn nodded. Picture frames, good ones. They just need new memories? The woman smiled. They always do. Together, they unpacked the box. One by one, the empty frames caught the light. Gleaming edges waiting for someone else's story. When they reached the last one, Marilyn hesitated. A small wooden frame, worn smooth at the corners. Inside was a photo of her and Henry in their backyard, laughing mid-sentence, sunlight tangled in her hair. This one stays, she said softly. That evening, Frankie stopped by unannounced, her knock a familiar rhythm. Got something for you, she said, stepping inside with a grin. She handed over a wrapped package, square, lightweight. Marilyn peeled the paper back. Inside was a picture frame, whitewashed wood, simple and new. Inside it, a photograph. Her and Frankie on the porch, coffee mugs in hand, mid-laughter. Marilyn smiled. A real one, unposed. When did you take this? Frankie shrugged. Last spring. You didn't notice because you were busy scolding my cat for stealing your scone. It deserved scolding. Yeah, well, so did half your family, Frankie said with a wink. I figured you should keep at least one face around that doesn't make you sigh. Marilyn chuckled, setting the frame on the mantel beside a small vase of daffodils. It fit perfectly. Unplanned, but right. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me, Frankie replied. Just promise not to delete me next time you get in one of your cleaning moods. Can't, Marilyn said, pouring them each a glass of wine. You're not archived material. As night deepened, Marilyn sat by the fireplace, the glow flickering across the new frame. Her phone chimed once. A calendar notification. Family. Dinner planning. April 10th. She opened it, scrolled to the bottom, and tapped unsubscribe. The screen blinked, then cleared. Outside, rain began to fall in steady, rhythmic sheets. Marilyn leaned back, listening. The sound wasn't melancholy anymore. It was punctuation. The closing of a sentence she'd been rewriting for years. On the mantel, the photo of her and Frankie caught the firelight, a warm shimmer of proof that not all bonds break, some just evolve into truth. Her phone buzzed again, a single new email from Evelyn. Call me when you're ready. There's one more thing we need to finalize. Marilyn's eyes lingered on the words. One more thing. She smiled faintly, wineglass raised toward the quiet house. Almost done, she murmured. The rain finally stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the city washed and gleaming under a pale sky. Marilyn sat at her dining table again, but this time there were no photographs, no folders, no lingering doubts, only a neat stack of ivory stationery and her favorite fountain pen. She tested the ink on a scrap of paper. The line came out smooth and sure. On the top sheet, she wrote carefully in looping script, "To those who once called me theirs." Then she began the slow, deliberate work of telling the truth, not as confession, but as record. Every letter was a door left slightly open but none wide enough for return. And as she wrote, the light through the window grew stronger, like approval. She began with Chelsea. The words came easiest because they had been waiting longest. Chelsea, you never had to love the past. Just respect it. It's easy to build a house when someone else has already cleared the land. What you call clutter, I called roots. I hope you learn the difference before the floor beneath you gives way. She signed it with her full name, Marilyn Harper. Not mom, not mother-in-law. She sealed the envelope without rereading it. Next came Derek's. This one was slower, heavier. She stared at the blank page for nearly a minute before writing the first line. Derek, you taught me that silence can be crueler than words. You thought peace meant avoidance, but peace cannot exist without presence. I don't blame you for choosing comfort. I only wish you'd realized what it cost. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed that one. The ache wasn't anger anymore. It was acceptance. The soft grief that comes when you finally stop expecting someone to arrive. Then Noah's. This letter took the longest and the fewest words. Noah, I hope you learn to listen. She almost added someday, but no. Someday implied waiting. She had finished waiting. She set her pen down and watched the ink dry in silence. The clock on the wall ticked softly, indifferent to legacy. When she reached Frankie's letter, the tone changed completely. She took a deep breath, reached for the small pressed flower she'd saved from her garden, a pale yellow daffodil, flattened and fragile. Sliding it between the pages, she wrote, Frankie, if laughter could be currency, we'd both die rich. Thank you for reminding me that friendship isn't about rescue. It's about recognition. You saw me when I was invisible to the people who should have known better. That's worth more than anything I could leave behind. She sealed it gently, adding a small piece of ribbon to tie the envelope shut. When she was done, she stacked all 4 letters neatly, edges aligned. Truth, bound in paper and ink. The stack looked almost ceremonial, small but potent, like a spell cast backward through time. By late afternoon, she was in Evelyn's office again. The lake outside was restless today, the wind pushing ripples across its gray surface. Evelyn sat behind her desk, reading glasses perched low. "I assume these are the letters you mentioned?" Marilyn nodded, placing the stack on the desk. "All finished." Evelyn looked at her, something almost tender softening her normally sharp gaze. "You don't want them mailed?" "No," Marilyn said. "They're not meant to start anything. They're meant to end cleanly." Evelyn studied her for a beat, then gave a small nod. "I'll lock them in the vault with the rest." She rose, walked to the corner of the room where a small brass safe stood built into the wall, and turned the dial with the care of ritual. The sound of tumblers clicking echoed softly. As Evelyn placed the letters inside, Marilyn felt something close inside herself too. Not shut off, but sealed properly, like a wound that had finally scarred over. When Evelyn turned back, she said, "You look lighter." Marilyn smiled faintly. "Truth doesn't weigh much once you stop carrying it for others." Evelyn returned to her desk, scribbling a note on the file. "You understand they may never read them?" "I wrote them for me," Marilyn said. "Reading's optional." On the drive home, the sky opened in streaks of late sunlight, the kind that only shows up after you've earned it. She rolled down her window, breathing in the damp air. The scent of earth and rain felt like forgiveness. When she pulled into her driveway, her phone buzzed with a new notification. A message from Frankie. "Frankie, dinner tomorrow. I'm thinking grilled cheese and truth." Marilyn laughed softly, replying, "Bring wine. I'll bring what's left unsaid." She slipped the phone into her pocket, unlocked her front door, and paused on the threshold. The air inside was still, but not lonely, just waiting, like a page between chapters. And upstairs, in Evelyn's vault miles away, her final words rested safe in the dark. Preserved not for forgiveness, but for record. Because Marilyn Harper had stopped hiding her truth. She'd written it into permanence. The fog rolled in early that morning, wrapping the lake in a gray hush that felt almost sacred. Marilyn sat in Evelyn's office once again, the same oak desk between them, but this time the weight of her decision was quieter, solid, settled, final. The legal folder in front of her bore a single handwritten note across the top. Amendment. Personal addendum. "This is the last revision," Marilyn said, sliding a thin page across the table. Evelyn adjusted her glasses, reading aloud. "No objections will be honored." She looked up. "You're sure you want that language to stay?" "Yes," Marilyn said simply. "I gave them chances when my voice still mattered. This isn't silence. It's closure." Evelyn exhaled slowly, a mix of respect and resignation. "Then that's that. No one can undo this now." The printer hummed softly as the final copy emerged, warm and smelling faintly of toner. Evelyn stamped it with her practiced precision and handed Marilyn the pen for her signature. Marilyn signed with slow grace, looping her M a little wider than usual, as if leaving space for everything unsaid. "There," she murmured. "The last word." When the ink dried, Evelyn sealed the document and locked it in the vault with the others. "You've rewritten more than a will, you know," she said. "You've rewritten yourself." Marilyn smiled faintly. About time someone did it right. Outside, the fog had started to lift, revealing the shimmer of the lake again. A silver sheet of stillness disturbed only by a single ripple, like a signature written in water. That afternoon, Marilyn drove to her attic one last time. Dust floated through the narrow light like drifting punctuation marks, the air dense with years of saved sentiment. She knelt beside a cedar chest, its brass latch tarnished but unbroken. Inside lay the remnants of a life lived through care and persistence. Henry's war medals, her wedding veil folded in tissue, a string of Christmas ornaments painted by tiny hands decades ago. And at the very bottom, the quilt. The one Chelsea had once called too homemade to display. Marilyn lifted it out carefully, the fabric soft and faded but still beautiful. A patchwork of blues, creams, and rose tones, stitched together from scraps of dresses, curtains, and Henry's old shirts. Each square told its own story. She folded it neatly, slipped it into a linen bag, and attached a note. For Frankie Doyle, the only person who ever saw its beauty before anyone else's approval was required. Then she placed it by the front door for the next morning's delivery. The rest of the chest she left open, sorting through each heirloom one last time. Her fingers brushed over Henry's old pipe, the silver cufflinks Derek had once borrowed and never returned, the faded photo of her parents standing in front of their first home. These weren't possessions anymore. They were evidence. And evidence belonged somewhere that valued preservation over pretense. She picked up the phone and called the Portland Historical Society. "Yes," she said to the archivist who answered. "I have a collection of household items, mid-century, personal, mostly handmade. They tell a story about a life ordinary enough to matter." By the next week, a curator would come with gloves and packing materials, labeling each piece with care. Marilyn would watch quietly as strangers treated her history with more reverence than her family ever had. It wasn't cruelty. It was correction. That evening, the house felt impossibly still. The walls seemed to hum with absence, but not the aching kind, the kind that sounds like peace settling in. Marilyn sat in her living room beside Henry's old chair, the same one Chelsea once called dated. She'd kept it anyway, its worn leather soft under her palm, its creak familiar as breath. She struck a match, lit a single candle, and placed it on the small table beside his photo. The flame flickered, dancing across the glass frame where his smile lived, bright as ever. She spoke softly into the quiet. "They'll tell the story wrong, Henry. They'll talk about my distance, not their absence. But the truth's in the paper now. The rest is just noise." The candle's reflection shimmered in her eyes, steady and unbroken. Her phone buzzed from across the room. A new message from Frankie. "Frankie. Package arrived. Quilt's perfect. You were right. It's art." Marilyn smiled, her gaze never leaving the candle. Marilyn. Some things just needed the right hands. She set the phone down, the glow of the candle illuminating the faint lines of strength etched around her mouth. Outside, the fog thickened again, curling against the windows. Inside, the flame held steady. Small, sure, a stubborn witness to everything that would outlast them. Morning sunlight stretched across the garden, thin and golden, touching everything like forgiveness that finally arrived. Marilyn stood by the old oak tree, soil-stained gloves on her hands, a trowel balanced in one palm, and a basket of daffodil bulbs in the other. The ground was soft from last night's rain. Perfect for planting. She knelt slowly, her knees pressing into the damp earth, the smell of it rich and grounding. "You'd like this, Henry," she murmured. "Order where chaos used to be." She pressed the first bulb into the soil and covered it gently. The wind moved through the branches overhead, scattering light across her face like an unspoken benediction. The neighborhood was waking up around her. The sound of lawnmowers, a barking dog, a child's bicycle bell ringing down the street. Mrs. Dorsey from next door waved from her porch. "You're out early, Marilyn." Marilyn smiled genuinely. "Couldn't waste a morning like this." "Looks beautiful," Mrs. Dorsey called. "It's getting there," Marilyn said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Little by little." She wasn't talking about the garden. Another neighbor jogged by, raising a hand in greeting. The mail carrier tipped his cap. The world, small as it was, still recognized her. And she felt for once, fully visible without having to earn it. She stood, stretching her back. The ache familiar, but not unwelcome. The daffodils were lined neatly now, their bulbs hidden beneath the soil, waiting for the quiet patience of time. As she rinsed her gloves at the outdoor spigot, her phone began to buzz on the porch rail. Derek. The name pulsed across the screen. Steady. Insistent. She let it ring. Then ring again. When it finally went to voicemail, she exhaled slowly, the sound closer to relief than regret. The phone buzzed once more. A text this time. Mom, we need to talk about something important. Can you call me? She read it twice, thumb hovering. Then she set the phone face down beside the potted fern and went back to her work. There was always something important. But her definition of that word had changed. By early afternoon, the sun had warmed the air, the oak's shadow stretching lazily across the yard. Marilyn gathered her tools, wiping her hands on her jeans, and sat down on the garden bench. The earth smelled like renewal, like something that had forgiven her for being late to her own peace. From this angle, she could see the faint outline of the daffodil rose. They would bloom soon, gold, soft, defiant. A living boundary between what she'd endured and what she'd built. She leaned back, closing her eyes. The sound of wind through the leaves reminded her of an old whisper, Henry's voice, low and amused. You never stop planting, do you? No, she murmured. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Derek. It was Evelyn. Evelyn. Check Facebook. Marilyn frowned, wiping her hands before unlocking the screen. She hesitated, then opened the app she'd sworn she'd abandoned. At the top of her feed was a post shared by Chelsea Harper. A minimalist photo, pale sunlight through blinds, captioned in cursive font. Sometimes cutting ties with toxic elders is the only way to heal. The feed comments were already filling in. So brave. Boundaries are healthy. Proud of you for protecting your peace. Marilyn stared at it for a moment. Then she laughed. Not bitterly, not sharply, but quietly, almost kindly. Seconds later, her phone buzzed again. Evelyn. Predictable. Marilyn typed back. Unoriginal. Then she took a screenshot, saved it, and put the phone away. She wasn't angry. If anything, the post confirmed what she already knew. Chelsea was still performing, still mistaking self-righteousness for evolution. But Marilyn no longer lived in that theater. She turned back toward the garden. The sun had dipped low enough to throw a golden halo around the oak's trunk. The soil glowed. She walked to the tree's base and lit a small candle in a glass holder, setting it beside a stone engraved with Henry's name. The flame wavered once, then steadied. Let them say what they need to, she whispered. The truth's already written. The wind shifted through the branches above, carrying away the last trace of bitterness she hadn't realized she'd been holding. And as the sky turned that soft watercolor blue of early evening, Marilyn sat quietly beside the candle, the only light she needed. Her phone buzzed again inside the house, unanswered. For the first time in years, she didn't even notice. Because peace, she realized, isn't earned by being right. It's claimed by finally walking away. The morning broke clean and soft. Pale sunlight stretching through lace curtains, catching the dust motes midair like tiny memories refusing to settle. Marilyn opened her window wide, inhaling the crisp scent of earth and blooming daffodils from the garden below. The air was cool but forgiving, the kind of morning that felt like a page turned quietly. From somewhere down the street came the faint bark of a dog, the rumble of a garbage truck, the pulse of life moving forward. Indifferent, unburdened, and exactly as it should be. On her kitchen table sat a neat pile of mail she hadn't opened yet. She poured herself a cup of coffee, strong, black, unadorned, and sat down. The first envelope she picked up was addressed in careful, childish handwriting. Inside were 3 thank you cards from the reading center, colored construction paper folded unevenly, edges smudged with fingerprints and glue. Dear Mrs. Harper, thank you for the books. My favorite was the one about the spider who writes words. I want to be a teacher like you someday. Ruby. Dear Mrs. Harper, we love story time. You make it sound like movies but with our eyes closed. Jamal and Lexi. Dear Mrs. Harper, you said stories last longer than people. I believe you now. Tyra Marilyn smiled, tracing the loops of their handwriting with a fingertip. There was no pretense in these words, no obligation, just truth in its purest form. She placed the notes in a small wooden box marked Keep. Inside were her letters from Henry, a dried daffodil, and one of Frankie's old postcards from the coast. The box wasn't big, but everything in it mattered. The doorbell rang. Frankie stood on the porch, a paper bag in one hand and her glasses sliding down her nose. Don't tell me you're already working, she said, squinting toward Marilyn's desk through the open window. Just reading my mail. That counts, Frankie said, pushing past her with the casual familiarity of a woman who'd long ago earned the right to ignore boundaries. She set the bag down on the kitchen counter. Scones, still warm. And before you ask, yes, real butter. Not that plant stuff. Marilyn smiled. You're determined to shorten my lifespan. Better to live happy than bland, Frankie said, tearing one in half and handing it over. They carried their breakfast out to the porch. The air still held the cool edge of morning, the daffodils bending slightly in the breeze like a soft applause. For a while, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was earned. When Frankie finally spoke, it was about something ordinary. The new neighbor's terrible paint choice, the overpriced tomatoes at the farmer's market, a funny misunderstanding at the pharmacy. Marilyn listened, laughed when it felt right, and let the quiet moments fill the rest. It wasn't avoidance. It was ease. The kind of conversation that exists between two people who've survived enough to know that not every silence needs filling. After a while, Marilyn rose and went back inside. From a drawer in her desk, she pulled out the final signed copy of her will, the one Evelyn had returned for her records, sealed in heavy parchment. She held it for a moment, feeling the texture of the paper under her fingertips. It was cool, thick, substantial. The physical weight of her story, captured and protected. Across the top, in Evelyn's precise handwriting, was a single note. Filed, immutable. She walked to her bedroom, opened the cedar chest where her old quilt used to live, and placed the document inside a small locked drawer built into the side. She turned the key, listening to the soft click that followed. It didn't sound like finality. It sounded like ownership. Her legacy, every page of it, was no longer theirs to rewrite, distort, or inherit. It belonged to her, and to the world she had chosen instead. Back on the porch, Frankie refilled their coffee mugs. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. Marilyn smiled, eyes on the daffodils trembling in the light. All the time. And? I think I already started it. Frankie leaned back in her chair, satisfied. Good. The living kind of legacy. The best kind. The breeze shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain in the distance. The two women sat in companionable quiet, mugs warm in their hands, the garden alive with color and promise. A single daffodil had already bloomed early, gold against the dark soil. Marilyn watched it sway, the light catching its edges like a small flame. Look at that, Frankie said softly. Right on time. Marilyn nodded. They always are. Inside, the locked drawer held everything she'd built, and everything she'd let go. Outside, the world went on, bright and uncaring, exactly the way she preferred it now. And as the morning stretched toward noon, Marilyn let herself simply exist, unclaimed, unowned, undeniably free. She took a slow sip of coffee, her voice barely above a whisper. They silenced my stories, so I made sure they'd never own the next chapter.